The emergency beacon cut through the void of space like a desperate scream. On the bridge of the medical frigate Times Sanctuary **. Dr. Sarah Chen looked up from her reports as the communication array crackled to life. The message that followed was broken, translated roughly by the ship's universal systems. But the panic was unmistakable. "Please, anyone. My child is dying. Kepler Station. Docking Bay 7. I have credits. Please." Sarah's fingers flew across her console, pulling up the star charts. Kepler Station was a trading post on the edge of civilized space, a place where dozens of species came to conduct business far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Council. It wasn't exactly a safe neighborhood, but Sarah had spent most of her career in places exactly like it. "Captain Morrison," she called to the bridge. "We're receiving a medical emergency beacon from Kepler Station. Requesting permission to respond." Captain Morrison, a grizzled veteran who had seen more than his share of space oddities, barely looked up from his own console. "Doc, we're supposed to be heading to the colony on Artemis Prime. Medical supplies are waiting. Captain, someone's child is dying." Sarah's voice carried the weight of her conviction. In her 15 years as a xenobiologist and field medic, she had never ignored a call for help, no matter how inconvenient. Morrison sighed, knowing better than to argue with his chief medical officer when she used that tone. "Fine. But we make it quick. Plot a course for Kepler Station." No. 3 hours later, the Times Sanctuary Times docked at the ramshackle station that looked like it had been built from spare parts and sheer stubbornness. The artificial gravity was a bit too heavy. The air recyclers worked overtime to filter out the smell of a dozen different species. And the lighting flickered occasionally, but it was home to thousands of beings trying to make an honest living in the space between worlds. Sarah grabbed her medical kit and made her way to Docking Bay 7. The corridors were crowded with traders, merchants, and travelers of every conceivable species. She passed a group of crystalline Vorthak arguing over mineral rights, 3 Gaetan traders examining what looked like rare spices, and a lone Korean pilot nursing a drink at a small bar. Docking Bay 7 was quieter than the rest of the station. As Sarah approached, she could hear soft, melodic sounds that might have been crying or singing. The universal translator was having trouble parsing it. She rounded the corner and stopped short. Huddled in the corner of the bay was a creature unlike anything in her extensive xenobiology training. She was roughly humanoid but covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. Her head was elongated, with a graceful neck, and large, intelligent eyes that held depths of sorrow Sarah had rarely seen. But it was what she held in her arms that made Sarah's breath catch. A baby dragon. No larger than a house cat, with wings so thin they were nearly transparent, and scales that barely covered its tiny body. The creature was breathing, but barely, and even from across the bay, Sarah could see that something was terribly wrong. "Are you the healer?" The translator finally caught up with the alien's words. Her voice was like wind chimes, beautiful but filled with desperation. "Please, I am Zara of the Draconic House of Ember. My daughter." "She is." Sarah approached slowly, her medical training taking over. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, xenobiologist and field medic." "May I examine your daughter?" Zara's scales rippled through a spectrum of colors Sarah had never seen before, probably indicating high emotional stress. "You are human." It wasn't a question, but there was something in her tone that Sarah couldn't interpret. "Yes, I am. Is that a problem?" No. Zara looked down at the tiny dragon in her arms. "The Korean healers turned us away. They said dragons are too different, too dangerous to treat. The Vorthok medical technician ran scans but said there was nothing he could do. Everyone says humans are strange healers. That you try impossible things." Sarah knelt beside them, studying the baby dragon. The tiny creature's breathing was labored, and her scales, which should have been vibrant with youth, were dull and gray. "What's her name?" "Lyra," Zara whispered. "She hatched only 10 days ago. She was perfect, beautiful. But then she started getting weaker. She won't eat, she won't fly, and her fire." Zara's voice broke. Dragon children must breathe fire to survive. It helps them digest food, regulates their body temperature. But Lyra, she produces no flame at all. Sarah opened her medical kit and pulled out her portable scanner. May I? Zara nodded, though her grip on her daughter didn't loosen. Sarah ran the scanner over the baby dragon, watching as data filled her handheld display. What she saw made her frown. The energy readings were all wrong. The metabolic functions were operating at maybe 30% of what they should be, and there were strange gaps in the neural activity. Zara, can you tell me about dragon physiology? I need to understand how Lyra's body is supposed to work. For the next hour, Zara explained the complex biology of her species. Dragons were energy-based life forms, able to convert raw stellar radiation into usable biological fuel through a complex series of organs that humans didn't possess. The fire breathing wasn't just for show. It was a crucial part of their digestive process, like stomach acid for humans. Without it, a dragon couldn't process food and would slowly starve. The fire comes from the flame gland, Zara explained, gently touching a spot just below Lyra's tiny throat. It should be active from the moment of hatching. But Lyra's, it's like it was never activated. Sarah nodded, running more detailed scans. The flame gland was there, perfectly formed, but completely dormant. It was as if some crucial switch had never been flipped. Has this happened before in your species? Rarely, very rarely. When it does, Zara's scales shifted to darker hues. The dragonlings die within 2 weeks of hatching. We have lost 3 generations of children this way. The Council of Flames believes it is a curse, punishment for some ancient sin. I don't believe in curses, Sarah said firmly. There's always a scientific explanation. She pulled up the data from her scans and began cross-referencing it with her extensive xenobiology database. Dragons weren't a well-studied species. They kept to themselves mostly, and their natural abilities made them formidable enough that most other species gave them a wide berth. As she worked, Sarah became aware that they were no longer alone. A small crowd had gathered at the entrance to the docking bay. Word had spread through the station that there was a dragon in distress, and curiosity had drawn spectators. But it was more than curiosity, Sarah realized. There was fear there, too. They're afraid of you, she said to Zara, not looking up from her readings. Always, Zara replied sadly. We are powerful when we're healthy. Our fire can melt steel, our claws can cut through most armor, and our minds can process quantum calculations that other species need computers for. They see us as weapons, not as people who laugh and cry and love our children. Sarah looked up at that, really looking at Zara for the first time. Past the fearsome exterior, she saw something achingly familiar. A mother terrified of losing her child. It was an expression Sarah had seen countless times across dozens of species. Love, it seemed, was truly universal. What about the father? Sarah asked gently. Zara's scales darkened to almost black. Corvin died defending our colony from raiders 3 months ago. Before Lyra hatched, he never got to see her. She looked down at the tiny dragon in her arms. She has his eyes, golden like starfire. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. Single motherhood was hard enough for humans. She couldn't imagine what it was like for a species that lived for centuries and formed bonds that lasted lifetimes. I'm going to help you, Zara. I can't promise anything, but I'm going to try. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Everyone else has given up. Even my own people. The Flame Keepers say I should let her die with dignity. Rather than prolonging her suffering, Sarah stood up, closing her scanner. Because where I come from, we don't give up on children. Ever. It's not in our nature. As if to emphasize her point, little Lyra stirred in her mother's arms, opening eyes that were indeed golden, like captured starlight. The baby dragon looked directly at Sarah with an intelligence that was startling in something so young. For a moment, Sarah could swear the tiny creature was trying to communicate something. The flame gland, Sarah said suddenly, an idea beginning to form. You said it needs to be activated. How is that normally done? It happens naturally, Zara explained. usually within the first few hours of hatching. The dragonling instinctively tries to breathe fire, and the gland activates in response to the neural impulse. But what if the neural pathway is blocked somehow? Or if the gland needs a different kind of trigger? Sarah was thinking out loud now, her mind racing through possibilities. In humans, we have vestigial organs. Things that used to serve a purpose but no longer do. What if dragons have the opposite? What if you've evolved past the need for manual activation? But in rare cases, that evolution isn't complete. Zara looked confused. I don't understand. How would you manually activate a flame gland? Sarah grinned. The expression that her colleagues knew meant she was about to do something either brilliant or completely insane. I have no idea yet. But I'm going to figure it out. She looked around the docking bay, taking in the curious crowd that had gathered. First, we need a better place to work. Somewhere with proper medical equipment and privacy. The medical bay on your ship? Zara asked hopefully. Even better. I know someone on this station who owes me a favor. And unlike a lot of people here, she's not afraid of dragons. Sarah helped Zara to her feet. Careful not to disturb little Lyra. Come on, let me introduce you to the best underground veterinarian in this sector of space. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Sarah's mind was already working on the problem. She had seen the impossible before, had found solutions where others saw only dead ends. The difference between humans and most other species, she had learned, was not that humans were smarter or stronger or more advanced. It was that humans were stubborn. When everyone else gave up, humans kept trying. And right now, that stubborn refusal to accept defeat might be the only thing standing between a baby dragon and death. The crowd parted as they walked, some in fear, others in curiosity. But Sarah noticed something else in their faces. Hope. Word was already spreading through the station that the human doctor was taking on the impossible case. In a place like Kepler's station, where the impossible happened every day, that was the kind of story people remembered. Sarah just hoped she would be worthy of their faith. Dr. Kes Nalhari's underground clinic occupied 3 levels beneath a legitimate electronics shop in the station's commercial district. Sarah had met the Thanari medic 5 years ago when they'd both been treating refugees from a mining accident on the Rim worlds. Kes had patched up Sarah's cracked ribs, while Sarah had saved the life of Kes's daughter using an experimental human technique that other species considered far too risky. The clinic was a maze of repurposed shipping containers connected by narrow walkways, but it was clean, well-equipped, and most importantly, it operated outside the official medical regulations that often prevented treatment of dangerous species like dragons. Sarah Chen, Kes's translator, crackled as the tall, mantis-like alien emerged from an examination room. I should have known you'd be involved when I heard about the dragon. Only humans are crazy enough to treat something that could incinerate them. Nice to see you too, Kes. Sarah gestured to Zara, who was holding Lyra close to her chest. This is Zara and her daughter Lyra. The baby's flame gland isn't functioning. Kes's compound eyes focused on the tiny dragon, and her antennae twitched in what Sarah recognized as professional interest. Flame gland dysfunction. I've read about it but never seen a case. The mortality rate is considered 100%. Considered by who? Sarah challenged. People who gave up, or people who actually tried? Touché. Kes led them deeper into the clinic, past examination rooms where other patients waited. Sarah caught glimpses of species she didn't recognize. The beauty of places like Kepler Station was that you never knew what you might encounter. I assume you want to use the advanced imaging suite? And whatever surgical equipment you have that can work on tissue that's potentially flame-resistant. Kes's antennae practically vibrated with excitement. This is going to be interesting. The imaging suite was a circular room lined with scanning equipment that could peer into a patient's body down to the cellular level. Sarah helped Zara position Lyra on the examination table, while Kes calibrated the scanners for dragon physiology. She's beautiful, Kes said softly as the scans began. The baby dragon's internal structure appeared on the holographic displays around them. Look at the bone density. Even at this age, her skeleton is already beginning to develop the crystalline matrix that will allow her to channel energy when she's older. Sarah studied the images with fascination. Dragon anatomy was unlike anything she'd studied before. Instead of traditional organs, they had complex energy processing systems. The flame gland was located at the base of the throat, connected to specialized neural pathways that should have been glowing with activity. There, Sarah pointed to a section of the neural scan. The pathways are intact, but look at the connection points. Zara leaned closer, though she couldn't read the medical displays as well as the doctors could. What do you see? 1. The neural connections to your daughter's flame gland are complete, but they're dormant. It's like they need to be primed somehow. Sarah pulled up a comparison scan from Kess's database. A healthy young dragon who had died in an accident. See the difference? In a normal dragon, these pathways show constant low-level activity even when not breathing fire. But in Lyra, they're completely dark, Kess finished. It's as if they were never switched on in the first place. There. Sarah began pacing, her mind working through the problem. In human medicine, we sometimes see patients whose organs are perfectly formed but fail to function because they're missing some crucial developmental trigger. Usually it's genetic, but sometimes. She stopped pacing suddenly. Zara, can you tell me about the hatching process? Everything that happened from the moment Lyra's egg began to crack? Zara's scales shifted to softer colors as she remembered. It was during the night of falling stars. Our people believe it's an auspicious time for hatching. The egg had been warming for 6 months. When it began to crack, I sang to her the traditional flame-calling songs. Flame-calling songs? Ancient songs that help young dragons find their fire for the first time. But Lyra, she never responded. Usually, dragonlings try to breathe fire immediately upon hatching. Their first breath should be flame. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to come together. What if the songs aren't just traditional? What if they're functional? Like a specific frequency that triggers the neural pathways? Kess looked up from the scans she was analyzing. That's actually not impossible. Many species use sound for biological functions. The cerulean whales of Proxima use subsonic frequencies to trigger mating behaviors. But Lyra didn't respond to the songs, Zara protested. Maybe she couldn't, Sarah said. What if something about her development means she needs a different frequency? Or a different kind of trigger altogether? Over the next several hours, Sarah and Kess ran every test they could think of. They analyzed Lyra's neural chemistry, her energy metabolism, even her genetic structure. The baby dragon was patient through it all, seeming to understand somehow that they were trying to help. It was during the genetic analysis that Sarah found it. Kess, look at this. Sarah highlighted a section of Lyra's genetic code. This sequence here, it's not typical dragon DNA. What is it? I don't know, but it's unlike anything in the Galactic database. Sarah frowned at the readings. It's almost like hybrid genetics? But that's impossible. Dragons don't interbreed with other species. Zara had been quietly watching the tests, but at this, her scales suddenly shifted to a pattern Sarah hadn't seen before. Deep purples and silvers that seemed to move like liquid metal. Zara? Sarah noticed the change immediately. What is it? There is something I didn't tell you about Corvin. Zara's voice was barely a whisper. He wasn't pure blood dragon. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah and Kess exchanged glances, both understanding the implications immediately. What was he? Sarah asked gently. His grandmother was human. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her mind reeling. Human? I didn't know that was even possible. It is rare, very rare, and often the children don't survive. But Corvin did. He was different from other dragons, stronger in some ways, weaker in others. His fire burned hotter than most, but he needed less energy to maintain it. Zara looked down at Lyra. I hoped the human genetics would make her stronger too. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Because hybrid children are not accepted by either species. Humans fear them for their dragon abilities, and dragons reject them for their human weaknesses. Corvin lived his entire life hiding what he was, Quote, Sarah stood up and began pacing again, but this time with excitement rather than frustration. This changes everything. Kess, pull up everything we know about human-dragon hybrids. There isn't much, Kess replied, her fingers flying over her console. Only a handful of documented cases over the past 3 centuries. Most died young from complications, but some survived. Sarah pressed. Like Corvin, 3 documented survivors, all developed unique characteristics. Sarah studied the data that appeared on the screens. The 3 known human-dragon hybrids had all shown unusual abilities. One had been able to breathe fire that could burn through substances normally fire-resistant. Another had possessed human empathy combined with dragon intellect, making them an incredibly effective diplomat. The third had been able to channel energy in ways that pure dragons couldn't. What if Lyra's flame gland isn't broken? Sarah said suddenly. What if it's different? What if she doesn't need the traditional dragon activation because she's part human? What would that mean for treatment? Zara asked, hope creeping into her voice. Sarah looked at the scans again, this time seeing them from an entirely new perspective. In humans, we have something called the sympathetic nervous system. It controls fight or flight responses, including the release of adrenaline. What if Lyra's flame gland is connected to human neural pathways instead of dragon ones? How would we test that? Kess asked. Sarah grinned, and both Zara and Kess took an involuntary step back. They were beginning to recognize that expression. We're going to do something that every other species would consider completely insane, Sarah announced. We're going to try to manually activate her flame gland using human medical techniques. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Kess observed. Probably, Sarah agreed cheerfully. But the alternative is watching her die slowly. And humans don't give up when the alternative is death. She turned to Zara. I need you to understand something. What I'm proposing has never been tried before. I have no idea if it will work. And there's a chance it could make things worse. But if Lyra really is part human, then maybe human medicine can reach the parts of her that dragon medicine can't. Zara looked down at her daughter, who was breathing so shallowly now that her tiny chest barely moved. What do you need from me? Trust, Sarah said simply, and maybe some of those flame-calling songs. If I'm right about the neural pathways, we might be able to use the songs in combination with human techniques to create the right trigger. Over the next hour, Sarah and Kess prepared for a procedure that was part surgery, part genetic therapy, and part educated guesswork. They would use microelectrodes to stimulate the dormant neural pathways, while Zara sang the traditional flame-calling songs. If Sarah was right, the combination of dragon instinct and human neural response would create the spark needed to activate Lyra's flame gland. If she was wrong, they might kill the baby dragon in the attempt. Are you sure about this? Kess asked as they made final preparations. Sarah looked at Lyra, so small and fragile on the examination table, then at Zara, whose scales had shifted through every color of worry and hope. No, Sarah admitted. But I'm sure that doing nothing isn't an option. And sometimes, when you don't know the answer, you have to be willing to guess. That's what makes us human. We try things that shouldn't work, and sometimes, just sometimes, they do. As they began the procedure, Sarah couldn't help but think about the irony. Here she was, a human doctor, trying to save a baby dragon using a combination of ancient dragon songs and cutting-edge human medicine. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans seem to find themselves in constantly. And for the first time since arriving at the station, Sarah felt truly hopeful. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was turning the impossible into the inevitable. The procedure began at exactly 14:30 station time. Sarah had her hands steady as she positioned the microelectrodes along the tiny neural pathways leading to Lyra's flame gland. The baby dragon was sedated but breathing, her golden eyes occasionally fluttering open to gaze at her mother. Zara sat beside the examination table, her scales shifting in slow, hypnotic patterns as she prepared to sing. The flame-calling songs must be sung with perfect pitch, she explained softly. Even the slightest variation can disrupt the natural harmonies. What do the songs actually say? Sarah asked as she made final adjustments to the neural stimulator. They tell the story of the first dragon, who learned to breathe fire by swallowing a star. Zara's voice took on a melodic quality even when speaking. They speak of inner light, of the spark that lives within us all, waiting to be awakened. Sarah nodded, though she was focused on the displays showing Lyra's vital signs. When you're ready, start with the first song. I'll begin the neural stimulation at the same time. As Zara began to sing, Sarah understood why the dragon language was so difficult for translators to handle. It wasn't just words. It was music, rhythm, and emotion all woven together into something that seemed to resonate in the bones. The song told of starlight and fire, of the courage to reach for the impossible. Sarah activated the neural stimulator, sending tiny electrical pulses along the pathways that should have been carrying signals to Lyra's flame gland. On the monitors, she could see the neural activity beginning to respond. Faint traces of electrical activity appeared where there had been none before. "It's working," Kess whispered, her compound eyes fixed on the displays. "The pathways are beginning to activate, but something was wrong." The neural responses were erratic, not following the expected patterns. The flame gland was receiving signals, but they were chaotic, unfocused. Sarah adjusted the stimulator, trying to find the right frequency, the right rhythm to match Zara's song. "The second song," Zara continued, her voice rising in pitch. "This one spoke of the dragon who learned to fly by believing she already could. Of the power of will over physical limitation." Sarah watched the displays with growing frustration. The neural activity was increasing, but it wasn't stabilizing. It was as if Lyra's hybrid neurology couldn't decide whether to respond to dragon instincts or human reflexes. The two systems were fighting each other, instead of working together. "Wait," Sarah said suddenly, pausing the stimulation. "We're approaching this wrong. We're trying to make her choose between her dragon side and her human side. What if she needs both?" "What do you mean?" Zara asked, though she didn't stop singing. Dragon parents, Sarah had learned, could multitask in ways that impressed even other sapient species. Your songs are calling to her dragon nature. But if she's part human, maybe I need to reach her human side too. Sarah looked at the neural pathways displayed on the screen. "Kess, can you adjust the stimulator to target both the dragon neural network and what looks like human sympathetic nervous system responses?" "That's incredibly complex," Kess warned. "I'd be essentially trying to activate two different species' neurologies at the same time." "Then we do it together," Sarah said. "You handle the technical calibration. I'll monitor her responses and adjust accordingly." As Zara moved into the third song, a lullaby about a mother's love being the first flame her children ever saw, Sarah and Kess worked frantically to reprogram the neural stimulator. They had to create a pattern that would speak to both sides of Lyra's heritage. Sarah found herself thinking about her own childhood, about the lullabies her mother had sung to her when she was frightened or sick. Human lullabies were different from dragon flame songs. They spoke of protection, of being safe and loved, of the warmth that came from being held close. "Zara," Sarah said softly, not wanting to interrupt the song but needing to try something. "Can you sing one of your songs? But can you sing it like you're singing to a human child who is also a dragon? Can you put human love into a dragon song?" Zara looked puzzled for a moment. Then understanding dawned in her golden eyes. When she began the next song, it was different. The melody was still unmistakably dragon, but there was something else woven into it. A tenderness, a gentleness that spoke to the part of Lyra that was human. And that's when everything changed. On the monitors, the chaotic neural activity suddenly began to synchronize. The dragon pathways, and what appeared to be human sympathetic responses, started working together instead of against each other. Sarah watched in amazement as the signals reached Lyra's flame gland, and for the first time since her hatching, the organ showed signs of life. "Sarah," Kess said urgently, "look at her energy readings." Lyra's entire body was beginning to glow with a soft, internal light. Her scales, which had been dull gray, started to show hints of color. Not the vibrant rainbow of her mother's emotions, but something uniquely her own. Her breathing deepened, became stronger, and then, with a tiny sound like a match being struck, Lyra breathed her first flame. It was small, barely large enough to light a candle. But it was real fire. More importantly, it was fire that burned with colors Sarah had never seen before. There were the traditional golds and reds of dragonfire, but threaded through them were blues and whites that seemed almost electric, like controlled lightning. Zara's song broke off in a sob of joy, and she reached for her daughter with trembling hands. She did it. She actually did it. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She continued monitoring the neural pathways, making sure the activation was stable and permanent. What she saw made her sit back in wonder. Lyra's flame gland wasn't just working, it was working better than a normal dragon's would. The hybrid neurology was allowing her to control her fire with a precision that pure-blood dragons usually took years to develop. Kess, are you recording all of this? Every detail, Kess confirmed. This is going to revolutionize our understanding of hybrid physiology. Over the next hour, they ran tests to ensure that Lyra's flame gland would continue functioning normally. The baby dragon, now fully awake and alert, seemed to understand that something important had happened. She kept producing tiny flames, as if testing her new ability. Each flame was perfectly controlled, never burning hot enough to harm anyone but warm enough to begin the digestive processes that would allow her to properly process food. She's going to be hungry soon, Zara said, noticing her daughter's increasing alertness. She hasn't eaten properly since hatching. Then let's feed her, Sarah said with a grin. I want to see how well this new system works. They moved to another room where Kess kept various foods suitable for different species. Dragon hatchlings typically fed on energy-rich crystal formations, but nobody was quite sure what would be appropriate for a hybrid. Lyra solved that problem herself. When presented with various options, she instinctively reached for both energy crystals and what appeared to be a human-compatible protein supplement. She would breathe a tiny flame to warm and partially digest the crystal, then eat small portions of the protein. Her mixed heritage, it seemed, required a mixed diet. Fascinating, Sarah observed. She's essentially getting the best of both physiologies: dragon energy processing and human protein synthesis. As they watched Lyra eat her first real meal, word began to spread through the station that the impossible had happened. A baby dragon had been saved by human medicine. The crowd that had gathered earlier began returning, but this time their faces showed wonder rather than fear. Among the crowd, Sarah noticed something interesting. There were other beings who hung back, watching carefully but not approaching. Their features were subtle variations on familiar themes. A Corian with unusually bright eyes. A Vorthak, whose crystalline structure included organic elements that shouldn't have been there. A humanoid figure whose proportions suggested mixed heritage. There are others, Sarah realized. Other hybrids, who have been hiding. Zara followed her gaze and nodded slowly. Interspecies relationships are rare, but they happen. The children, they usually don't survive, or they live their lives hiding what they are. Not anymore, Sarah said firmly. What we learned here today, the techniques we developed, they could help other hybrids too. Each one will be different, but the principle is the same. Instead of trying to force them to choose one heritage over another, we help them embrace both. Over the following days, word of Lyra's successful treatment spread throughout the station and beyond. Sarah found herself fielding calls from across the galaxy. Doctors wanting to understand the techniques, scientists requesting data, and most touching of all, parents of hybrid children asking for help. The first to approach them directly was a Thanari human hybrid named Kill, whose bioluminescence patterns were all wrong for Thanari, but whose human genetics prevented him from living in the low-oxygen environment his people preferred. Using the same principles they'd developed for Lyra, Sarah and Kess were able to design a treatment that allowed Kill to regulate his oxygen needs while maintaining his natural bioluminescence. Then came Vera, whose Corian crystalline structure was contaminated with what other doctors had called human weakness, but which Sarah recognized as the ability to heal damaged crystal lattices through human stem cell regeneration. Instead of trying to suppress the human elements, they enhanced them, giving Vera abilities that neither species possessed alone. Each case was different. Each required new innovations. But the basic approach remained the same. Honor both heritages, instead of forcing a choice. 3 weeks after the initial procedure, Captain Morrison found Sarah in the station's observation deck, watching Lyra play with her mother in the zero-gravity recreation area. The young dragon was now healthy and vibrant, her unique flame allowing her to perform aerial maneuvers that amazed even experienced dragon observers. "Doc," Morrison said, settling into the chair beside her. "We've got orders to move on. The colony on Artemis Prime is still waiting for those supplies." "I know," Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off Lyra. "Just 5 more minutes?" Morrison followed her gaze and whistled softly. "She's something special, isn't she?" "They all are. Every one of these hybrid children has capabilities that their pure-blood parents never imagined. We're not just saving lives. We're discovering entirely new possibilities for what sentient life can become. The Galactic Medical Council is asking for a full report on your techniques." Sarah finally looked at him. And I told them they'd get it when you were ready to give it. This is too important to be rushed by bureaucrats." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Lyra attempted a complex aerial pattern that combined dragon flight dynamics with what looked suspiciously like human gymnastic principles. She was learning to be both dragon and human, not choosing between them but becoming something entirely new. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah said eventually. "What's that?" "She's not alone anymore. None of them are. For the first time, hybrid children have a place where they belong. Not with one species or another, but with each other. We're not just treating medical conditions. We're creating a community." As if to emphasize her point, Kill appeared in the observation area, his bioluminescence patterns shifting in complex rhythms as he communicated with Lyra in a hybrid language they were developing together. Vera joined them, her crystalline structure refracting their communications into light patterns that were beautiful enough to make Morrison gasp. "A new species," Sarah said softly. "Not human, not dragon, not Thanari or Corian, or any of the traditional classifications. Something that's all of them, and none of them at the same time. And it all started because one human doctor was too stubborn to let a baby dragon die," Morrison observed with a smile. Sarah grinned back at him. "Well, someone had to be the first to try. That's what we humans do. We try impossible things until they become possible." Unquote. As they prepared to leave Kepler Station, Sarah received a final transmission from Zara. The Dragon had decided to establish a permanent medical facility on the station, specifically to treat hybrid children and their unique needs. Other hybrid families were already making their way to the station, seeking help and community. "Thank you," Zara's message said. "Not just for saving Lyra's life, but for showing us that being different isn't a weakness to be hidden. It's a strength to be celebrated." Sarah saved the message and began preparing her report for the Galactic Medical Council. It would be the first comprehensive study of hybrid physiology ever undertaken, and it would fundamentally change how the galaxy understood the possibilities of interspecies cooperation. But more than that, it would be proof of something Sarah had always believed: that the greatest discoveries came not from choosing sides, but from refusing to accept that sides had to be chosen at all. As the Time Sanctuary Times pulled away from Kepler Station, Sarah watched through the viewport as Lyra performed one final aerial display, a complex pattern of flight and flame that painted temporary artwork across the starfield. It was a goodbye, but also a promise. The universe was a little brighter now, a little more welcoming to those who dared to be different. And somewhere out there, other impossible children were being born, waiting for someone stubborn enough to help them become everything they were meant to be.